All right, so today we're going to take a deep dive into this pretty wild story coming out of Nigeria.
Yeah.
You might have seen the video floating around online.
Mm-hmm.
Nigerian Senator Natasha took to YouTube to address the UN directly.
Bold move.
It is, and she's claiming her suspension from the Nigerian Senate is totally unjust.
Absolutely. And I think what's really interesting about this is it's not just a personal story.
Right.
It gives us a chance to look at the bigger picture of politics in Nigeria, especially when it comes to women in politics.
Yes, that's a great point. It's about way more than just her.
Exactly. And I think to really get what's going on here, we got to remember that Nigeria has a history of having very few women in positions of power.
Yeah.
Senator Natasha herself points out that women only hold something like 3.6% of political positions.
Wow.
And it's even worse in the Senate. It's just 2.8% women, so.
That's crazy.
Yeah, so that's the context we got to keep in mind when we look at what happened to her.
Absolutely. So to recap for everyone, from her YouTube video, it seems that she was suspended for 6 months.
Right.
And that suspension came after she filed a petition alleging sexual harassment against the Senate president.
Yeah, pretty serious accusation, and it seems like they didn't take it lightly.
No, not at all. And the suspension, it's not just like a slap on the wrist,
No, it's definitely a big deal.
She's facing some pretty severe consequences here. They cut her salary, she lost her security detail, and she's been barred from the National Assembly.
So essentially, she's been stripped of her power.
Yeah, exactly. And her main argument is that this suspension, it's not just unfair, but it's also illegal.
Right.
And she even suggests it might be a political retaliation.
Which is a pretty serious accusation to throw around.
Yeah, it is. Do you think there's any basis to that claim? I mean, have we seen this kind of thing happen before in Nigerian politics?
Well, it's tough to say for sure if this is straight-up retaliation.
Right.
Accusations of political maneuvering, they're not exactly rare in Nigeria. But to really judge if the suspension was illegal, we got to look at the normal process.
Okay.
So usually the Senate has a special committee that looks into complaints like hers, and then they propose actions.
Uh-huh.
And then the entire Senate votes on it. So there are some checks and balances in place.
Okay.
But, politics can be messy.
Yeah.
Agendas can influence things.
Right.
Even with a process in place.
So you're saying that the process itself could be open to manipulation?
Potentially.
Wow, that really adds another layer to this whole thing.
Yeah, and that's where the whole issue of women in Nigerian politics becomes even more important.
How so?
Well, Senator Natasha makes this powerful point. She says, if a senator can be treated this way,
Yeah.
just imagine what regular Nigerian women go through when they experience harassment and try to get justice.
That's a really chilling thought.
Yeah, and this isn't just a Nigerian problem either.
Right.
Think about it. Around the world, women in power, they face so much more scrutiny, sometimes even hostility.
You're right. It's like they can't win.
It's tough, and she's using her platform to shine a light on this vulnerability that women face, not just in politics, but in society as a whole.
And it's interesting that she specifically brings up the UN declaration that calls sexual harassment a form of gender-based violence.
Right. It's a smart move.
Yeah.
She's not just saying this is a personal attack. She's making it about women's rights.
Yeah.
And by bringing the UN into it, she's trying to make this an international issue.
I mean, you got to admire her courage.
Absolutely. And I think this deep dive has really given us a good grasp of all the different angles to this story.
Yeah, it's definitely a complicated situation, and I'm curious to see what happens next.
Me too. And it'll be interesting to see how it plays out legally.
Absolutely. I mean, whether or not they end up deciding that her suspension was illegal. This whole case has really gotten people talking about important issues.
For sure.
Due process, political power dynamics, and women's rights in Nigeria.
Exactly. And honestly, it's a reminder of just how much work there is to do when it comes to women in politics.
Not just in Nigeria, but everywhere.
It really makes you think about how we as global citizens can support women who are trying to break down these barriers and face these huge challenges. What steps can we take to make sure their voices are heard and their rights are protected?
That's something we all need to think about.
It's a big question, but it's one worth asking.
It really is. Thanks for helping us break down this story.
Of course. Happy to be here.
It's been a fascinating deep dive.
Agreed.
And for everyone listening, keep those questions in mind.
Yeah.
What can we do to create a world where women in power are the norm, not the exception?
That's what we should all be striving for.
Absolutely. All right, thanks again.
Anytime.
And that's a wrap on this deep dive.
Until next time.
See you later.